Good evening. We are sitting down again to conduct another conversation with His Eminence Archbishop Lazar Puhalo, who is the founding abbot of the Monastery of All Saints of North America in Dewdney, British Columbia, in Canada. Good evening, Your Eminence.
Good evening.
You wrote once that integrity, and I quote, integrity is in short supply in Christianity, particularly in America, and the loss of integrity engenders a loss in trust and in faith, unquote. What is your advice for helping to restore our Christian integrity?
I believe it spoke about America and Canada, both. There's a substantial difference in the sort of vaporizing of Christianity in America and Canada. Both are receding on really different premises for different reasons. The slow disappearance of Christianity in Canada has been very silent, unnoticed, unargued, and a few sort of local churches have been a little bit upset by it. But we had some years ago I think during the time of Premier Johnson in Quebec, what was called the Quiet Revolution. And it was partly in that particular case because the Roman Catholic Church had both destroyed itself and sort of worn itself out. I remember there was a famous case, like in the 50s, in the townships region of Quebec, when the local Catholic churches were getting involved in politics and trying to tell people how to vote. And the threat they would use was, you should be excommunicated if you don't vote for the right party. And consequently, people voted. The party that lost, however, initiated a lawsuit saying that people are voting under duress and threat from the church. And the judge said, well, that's true, so we'll have the whole election all over again in this particular riding. And when the election was held again, the Catholic Church forbidden to involve itself in politics and to threaten people how they should vote. Then the opposite party did win. I believe they were telling people to vote for probably not the Bloc Québécois, but the Conservative Party. And in the second round of elections, the Liberal Party won a huge majority. So then it sort of established that churches in Canada should not threaten people, telling them who they should vote for. And if a religious body gets involved in an election, then it should register as a lobby, not a church. And consequently should also lose its tax exempt status, just like any political lobby does. And the other thing was in Quebec, of course, there was a lot of sexual abuse in over a century, over the years. And the church had become very overbearing, very controlling, and controlled the entire educational system, because the public school system in Quebec was Catholic schools. And this overbearingness and dominance and meddling in politics all the time, and together with the obvious hypocrisies and sexual abuse and all that, weakened the Catholic Church among the Quebecois people. And during the 60s, I believe the early 60s, we had the Quiet Revolution, where by the time it was over, by the 80s, 90s, many of the great oratories in Catholic churches were standing empty. And some of the historical ones were kept open as historical landmarks by the government. But the church attendance was extremely low, and in the end, Quebec became the least religious province in Canada. And that was in reaction, as in Ireland, a reaction to the way the Catholic Church conducted itself. In other parts of Canada, the shift away from religious affiliation was also unnoticed, almost very quiet, very silent. And when the United Church of Canada was created, and then in the 60s forward, it became more a social justice institution. And a lot of the pastors in the social justice movement seemed almost embarrassed to be Christians. So this, in Canada, just drifted away like the morning fog. No one made a big issue of it. No one really noticed. No one seemed to have really cared a great deal. Maybe in Bible Belt places like Abbotsford, BC, and the Okanagan regions, where a lot of fundamentalist religion was present, that people noticed it. In Alberta, of course, which is the most religious province in Canada, at least in Calgary, and in Edmonton not so much. But that was almost unheralded, unnoticed. In America, the largest, the fastest growing religious demographic is not affiliated or atheist. And the percentage of atheists and non affiliated people in America is rapidly growing. Now, it's growing partly because of the way, particularly the evangelical movement, has conducted itself in a completely shameless manner, replacing Jesus Christ with the American flag, replacing Jesus Christ with the religion in America is America. Jesus Christ is merely a slogan for let's say, evangelical and Pentecostal churches. Some of those churches are more hysterical than others, but evangelicalism in particular, now, because it is represented mostly in public media, television, radio, say the Baptist Church and Methodist Church, the Lutheran Church, aren't producing televangelists and these long religious programs. So what most young people, everybody, sees with these televangelists and with the evangelicals is that hate and fear dominate their teachings and preaching. And people simply get sick and tired of hate and fear after a while. And they're teaching people to hate people that the general population no longer hates and no longer fears. But instead of preaching the gospel, they're preaching political parties. They're preaching politics, political positions. And they have reduced Christianity from being a living, vital faith in Jesus Christ to being more or less a moral philosophy, and moralistic instead of redemptive, instead of healing. And, generation by generation, people start seeing through this wall of hate and fear. They just simply aren't prepared to hate everybody that some demagogue on a stage or with a microphone tells them they must hate. So there's only a certain percentage and a certain demographic in the population who will buy into this hate. And it's mostly the right wing. And I want to say something about that, the ultra conservatism, because there's a correlation here. We had research, I know the University of Nebraska, UCLA, and at least one other university, had done some research on the structures of moderates, liberals, and ultra-conservatives. And the conclusion was that the more hyperactive the amygdala is, the larger the amygdala is, the more conservative you will be, because that is the fear center of the brain. And it responds to the preaching of fear and hate in a way that others just don't respond to. So you'll see in ultra-conservatives, you'll see that fear and hate sell better than love and reason because of that fear factor. And the brains of ultra-conservative tend to be hyperactive in the fear region of the brain. That is a correlation which, one can check out for themselves. And so that's part of the issue, is that this is forming a division between rational believing Christians and the extreme right in Christianity. Now, it could be the extreme left, except the extreme left are very often not Christians, so that they don't figure into this. The extreme right is to the point now where Jesus Christ really is only a slogan in the evangelical church. They're not preaching the teachings of Jesus Christ, and they're really not preaching the gospel. Instead of the gospel, they're preaching politics, and the gospel is fallen by the wayside. Jesus Christ said, "If you love me, keep my commandments. And a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I've loved you. That people will know you're my disciples if you have love for one another, not if you have a list of people you're supposed to hate or fear. Have love for one another. And to love your neighbor as yourself," which means literally to have empathy for your neighbor as you have empathy for yourself. So the ladder of divine ascent for, at least for Orthodox Christians, should be the Beatitudes. We have the famous book by John Climacus, the Ladder of Divine Ascent, and he gives way for monastics should ascend spiritually. But for us to ascend toward the fullness of the teachings of Jesus Christ and toward being his actual disciples, the Beatitudes should really be our ladder of divine ascent. And if we love him, we'll keep his commandments, not use him as a front man for political propaganda. And this is exactly what's being happening. Christ is being used as a slogan for right-wing politics, as a front man, and a cheap front man at that. The gospel is not being preached. Politics have almost totally replaced the gospel itself. And of course, from an Orthodox perspective, and I know this when I used to lecture at universities across America and in Europe. In America in particular, I seldom lectured in a religion class. I lectured in a combination of philosophy and physics classes mostly, but I wore my cassock and traveled in full sail, as I like to say. So religion always came up from questions among people. And I used to ask, look, how many of you were raised in a Christian family? Children born before the 90s or mid-80s, it was sometimes around 75%. And I'd ask, how many of you still consider yourself to be Christians? It was never more than 50%, ever. And usually it was around 25% of say, if I have an auditorium with 1,000 people in, 25% of them would say, well, we still consider ourselves to be Christians. And I would then ask, and sometimes in the coffee time that followed, what made you turn away from Christianity? What made you become discouraged with Christianity? Well, of course, bigotry and hypocrisy always figure in, but the number one reason was the doctrine of atonement, that Jesus Christ was a human sacrifice necessary to satisfy the anger and passions of God, because without the human sacrifice, God was unable to forgive men. God was unable to forgive men without a human sacrifice of his own son. There's some cosmic law that that God had no power over, that prevented him from being able to forgive mankind without a human sacrifice. That was always a huge stumbling block, especially for university students. And it turned out to be a huge stumbling block for a lot of the people who are now converting to the Orthodox Church, where that teaching is considered to be a heresy. So that was a big issue of it. And the concrete descriptions of hell and who was going to hell were another big stumbling block for younger people in the West. It was the uh, sort of weapon or tool of fear used to control people, and sometimes used to tell them who they should vote for. But it was a control mechanism. And I wish more of our own people would read the book Gehenna and talk of St. Mark of Ephesus gives us what really is the first systematic doctrinal statement about the afterlife, about the departure of the soul from the body. And before that, there was nothing, no systematic doctrinal uh, discussion about that. It's important to know that, as St. Basil the Great says, you look at icons that have the river of fire in the middle, and those are the actual canonical icons of the Last Judgment, of the Judgment. The icons with little people floating around holding scales in their hands, taken from a pagan Egyptian motif, the weighing of the soul in the scale, pans of the scale. And the ones with some serpent crawling up toward the feet of Christ, and all of these uh, extraordinarily Halloween type of portrayals of the Last Judgment, which some young Greek kids in Vancouver once called the Halloween icon, that are meaningless. And St. Basil the Great tells us that the river of fire is both heaven and hell. One and the same river of fire that issues from the feet of the Ancient of Days, which is Jesus Christ, and the judgment is this. We're judged, and I think Cyril of Jerusalem actually says that our conscience is our only judge. Our conscience is what judges us. God doesn't sit up opening one book after another book after another book with millions of people lined up waiting for their judgment. When the river of fire is literally the presence of the love and glory of Jesus Christ. And coming face to face with the love and glory of Jesus Christ, our conscience itself tells us if we're on the left side or the right side of that fire. And if you're on the right side of it, it's light and warmth if you're into your conscience. And if you're on the left side, it's like burning in your conscience. It burns your conscience. As I believe it's Ephraim, maybe Isaac Ephraim says, the Syrian says, there's no sin greater than the sin against love. No sin burns more deeply than the sin against love. When our conscience comes face to face with the love and glory of Jesus Christ, which is spurned in this life, and we're talking about people who spurned it, not people who never heard of Jesus Christ somewhere in the mountains of Tibet. But you've spurned the love of Jesus Christ. Now you're face to face with the reality of his love and glory, and your conscience becomes hell for you, or becomes heaven for you, on the day when the secrets of man's heart are made clear, either accusing or excusing him. And St. Mark of Ephesus is very interesting to read, and people should study it very carefully. The 10 refutations of the doctrine of purgatory made to the cardinals in the Council of Florence. And the book Gehenna prints a good portion of that, plus several other fathers. And people would go on Amazon and check out the book, just Gehenna. Then read it carefully and continue your quest in the Holy Fathers. And you'll find that St. Mark of Ephesus gives us the only formal doctrine of the whole matter. It's something that when you talk about hell, it's going to be some geographic location someplace in caverns below the earth or in the very center of the earth or some, Middle Earth place. And so God is supposedly absent from that place. You're completely cut off from God there. He's not present. Well, it's as Metellinos, the great theologian Metellinos, tells us, to say that there's any place in existence where God is not present is idolatry. There's no place in all of existence where God isn't present. And that would include if you believed in a literal physical hell, as even, some of our church writers, saints and all that, probably did believe in it because it was taken from Greek mythology. And they'd heard it through the whole Greek culture, and it just became endemic in folk theology. But anyway, it's necessary to read St. Mark of Ephesus to get a clear picture. But that whole concept of hell, it turns out that a vast number of people see it as a simple control mechanism based in fear. Now, fear will always sell better than love, and hate will always be more powerful than reason. So you've got a lot of salesmen seeking power who deal in fear and hate, because that's a path to dominance, control, and power. So we need to understand that that is a part of the reason why a lot of younger people are just simply fading away from Christianity. And it does happen that the hate preaching against gay people is part of the reason for young people not trusting Christianity, because kids at school, kids in university, at work and all, they all know some gay people are perfectly nice, decent individuals. And they can't see why they have to be hated and feared. See, you're not even preaching things with any kind of reason. It just you look at the probably mythological story of Sodom and Gomorrah. It likely is mythological. There's several aspects of it that make one question it. And you have a verse in Leviticus and Apostle Paul's description of Roman culture, and you're going to build a whole superstructure of hate and fear on that. People who know these people are supposed to hate and fear know that they're perfectly decent, nice people, just trying to live their life, trying to love as best they can, and they don't hate them. They don't fear them. They can't hate them and fear them because they know them as living human beings and not as some abstract superstition. So that's part of it. If you would present reasons with sound doctrine behind it in a loving, compassionate manner, you could convince more people. But if you're going to spit people's name out and you're going to lace it with your whole description and talk about them with hate, malice, and fear, people are just like in Quebec, you're going to overburden yourselves, and people are going to say, oh, for God's sakes, I don't want this. Why should I? I have only one life to live. I want to live a peaceful, happy life as best I can. But the more I hate, the more I fear, the less peace I can have in life, the less happiness I can have in life. And so much of my energy is expected to be consumed with hate and fear and with political pressure that I don't want any part of it. I don't need, who needs it? That's the attitude that is shaping a lot of younger people leaving church. Even with us, we sort of boast about, oh, so many evangelicals are coming into the Orthodox Church, and of course bringing their negative baggage with them and spreading it all over the church. Well, okay, fine, but how many young people born in the faith are leaving the church? I know there was a complaint from Constantinople about the diminishing rates of baptisms in the Greek Archdiocese of America, and the diminishing number even of marriages, because you can get married by justice of the peace, fine. If you don't understand the holy mysteries of sacraments, then there's no reason to pay this huge surcharge that the Greeks place on marriage. You have to pay your head tax to the diocese, your membership tax to the parish, and maybe a few $100s for the wedding itself, and a couple $100 to rent the church hall for a reception. Well, you're perfectly legally married if you go to a justice of the peace. Never mind that he can't sanctify anything, and never mind that, well, what's the difference? Marriage in the church is seen by a lot of people as just an ethnic custom, an ethnic tradition. And even baptism is seen as it's an ethnic custom. Baba and Jilla or Papu and Yaya, they want the child baptized in the church, so we'll do it for their sake. But the substantial reason and meaning of it is something that, and I know this from speaking to Orthodox clubs in various universities, from speaking to groups in Orthodox parishes. They have no general, some people do, they have no general knowledge of the real substance, theological, mystical, and spiritual substance of the holy mysteries. And so they regard them as, well, we'll do it for Papu and Yaya, just to please them. And that will happen time after time. And the same with marriage. Oh, we'll get a church marriage, which can be very expensive, especially for Greek. And we could just go to Justice of the Peace and that's it. It costs us $25 and the whole thing's done. So it's these lack of knowledge and understanding of the meaning of things. And I'm talking about the Orthodox Church. In the Orthodox Church, fine, a lot of people with their bags packed and their backpacks, bringing all of the negative aspects of evangelicalism infecting the Orthodox Church with it. But let's have a real survey of how many young people are not coming to the church anymore, Orthodox young people. And let's go and find out why. So we have refugees from Protestantism coming into the Orthodox Church and corrupting and perverting it with their baggage. Nobody's telling us how many young people are actually not showing up in church anymore. Greeks, Russians, Serbs, Bulgarians are just simply not there anymore. They're gone. What's being done to, keep them? Well, nothing, basically. That's I know when we had the protest about the bombing of Serbia, we met down at the what used to be the courthouse art gallery on the steps of it, and there were several flags flying. There was a group who had a Byzantine flag, so the late Bishop Varlam went out and talked to them and says, "Oh, so you must be Greek." Yeah, they're Greek. Which church do you go to? And one of the kids said, "Oh, the one that's having the dance." Literally, he said, "The one that's having the dance." But otherwise, they weren't terribly interested in it as such. They just realized that the Orthodox nation of Serbia was being bombed, and they were joining the protest along with people from India. We had the Indian flag there, and people from India, a few from Pakistan, and a few others who were not Christian at all. Had come to because protesting America's imperialism. Uh, but it was interesting. Which church you go to? Oh, the one that has the dance, or the party, or whatever, And so we're not weighing both, but in general, in America, religion is receding. The fastest growing demographic, and anyone can find to check out the statistics, is atheism, or what they call nuns, not affiliated with any organized religion. And evangelical Protestantism is one of the major forces driving the rise of atheism in America today, because it has forsaken Christ and replaced Jesus Christ with the country, the state, and not just with the country, the state, but with the Republican Party. Christianity has been replaced by the Republican Party in many cases. And, it doesn't, I don't care, Republican, Democrat, whatever. Christianity and Christ, Jesus Christ, if Christ and the gospel is not coming above all politics, above all political parties, then you have betrayed Jesus Christ. Christian nationalism is a monstrous heresy that's eating Christianity alive and destroying it in America. The whole thing is being totally distracted from the gospel. And I've talked to some of my colleagues who deal with a lot of people who are deconstructing Christianity. I deal with a mass of people who are deconstructing and writing, asking questions and all. But some of my colleagues who deal with it on a regular basis, the deconstruction, they have asked evangelical ministers, and could be Baptist, Methodist, but mostly evangelical ministers, why aren't you preaching the Beatitudes? Well, that was before the crucifixion. After the crucifixion, none of that stuff Jesus taught is really important. The crucifixion takes care of all of it. And so they focus on death and to a certain degree the resurrection, not realizing that the nativity of Christ, the birth of Christ, is not celebrating the birth of a magic baby in Bethlehem. It's celebrating the incarnation of the co-suffering love of God for mankind. And what does the first part of redemption consist in? That Jesus Christ, fully divine by nature, accepts the fullness of human nature. And in him, those two natures are reconciled, so that the real problem is not sin. The real problem is alienation. Alienation from God. Sin is merely a symptom. It's one of the things that results from alienation from God. In Jesus Christ, that alienation is abolished, and the human nature itself is redeemed out of its alienation from God. And we, in and through Jesus Christ, participate in that redemption from the alienation. I don't want to go into a lot of theological discussions of it here, but the way Christianity is being perverted and destroyed in American Christianity, and particularly in political Christianity, which is right-wing Christianity in this case. Left-wing, forget it. They're not bothering with Christianity at all, so they don't figure into this discussion. The perversion of Christianity, the destruction of the gospel, is leading to the evaporation of Christianity in America. the replacement of the love of Jesus Christ with hate, fear, and malice. Leave Jesus Christ out of the equation altogether. The reduction of Christianity from the gospel of salvation to a moralistic philosophy has so destroyed and distracted from the gospel of salvation itself and completely replaced it with a politics of hate, a politics of malice, a politics of fear. And Jesus Christ is just not part of the equation anymore. So that's what's happening to Christianity in America. In Canada, quite different. It just sort of evaporated like the morning fog slowly, except in perhaps Alberta. And even in Alberta, it's a little bit shaky. And the extremism of some of the Alberta Christianity is making it evaporate even faster. So by and large, across Canada, religion is not a very important factor. Canada is not a religious nation as such. It has pockets of religion. People are very religious. People are deeply believing. But by and large, it never figures in the politics of the country. And the religious bodies in Canada are not challenging political parties or preaching political parties. The ones who still believe preach the gospel. And we have some right-wing extremists who preach hate and fear also, but they're so insignificant in Canada as to be something totally ignored. In America, it's a very powerful movement, and it is sapping the life out of the gospel, sapping the life out of Christianity, and reducing Christianity to a series of political involvements, political preaching, political parties that dominate in the place of the rabbi from Nazareth. That's what's happening.
Thank you, Your Eminence.